I'm Serenity and this is my channel and welcome back to my kitchen. Today we are going to be making this F1 checkered inspired cake together. Isn't she cute? Look, it goes with my shirt. So I'm going to be teaching you everything from start to finish, including my first time working with icing sheets, and I will tell you something I learned lessons. I'll be sharing all my tips and tricks and also how to actually pipe the top instead of using chocolate like I always do. So let's get into it. Like always, we are going to start by stacking and crumb coating our cake. Recently, I have switched over to using only cake drums, which is a thicker cake board because it holds the weight much better. So between each of my layers, I'm going to do a thin layer of Russian buttercream, and then we're going to crumb coat in opaque white. Now, this cake is the same as my Ferrari cake, which was, I think, my last cake video. I was just reusing it because, well, most of the time, most of the cakes you see that I decorate, I just keep reusing them to not be wasteful. So for this, I'm going to make sure the white cake crumb coat is nice and opaque because we're using red velvet cake layers and those crumbs like to be nice and bold. Once that has set in the freezer and it's tacky to the touch, we're going to do our top coat, which is this bright red color. And I'm just doing a pretty thin coat because red is really hard to get to stand out and get a true red color. Once that's smoothed out, I put it back in the freezer, and now I'm going to go in with my edible image sheets. I got these at a local cake supply store. I'm actually in the process of finding a good edible printer, but to measure this, I took just a normal sheet of paper. Obviously, no one's gonna eat this cake, so no one was gonna touch this cake. And then I trimmed that sheet of paper to the size of the cake. Now I have two of these checkered print sheets, one for each side of the heart, and I'm just cutting them with my paper cutter machine. Now I decided to go a little over on size here because I can always cut it down when trimming too short. Setting those aside, I decided I'm next going to do my buttercream transfers. So I printed out the F1 logo and just mirrored it, and I'm tracing it with a small 3M tip. And for the life of me, I could not get this to be smooth enough. So you're seeing me, I did this multiple times, tried different techniques. I don't know what was up. It was also midnight, as you could tell by my Snoopy pajamas as I was doing this. But I'm smoothing off with a palette offset spatula, which means it has a tapered edge. So I went back to the cake that had been in the freezer and tried to transfer it, and it spread out too thick. So I scraped it off and then covered where I'm scraping off with some more red buttercream and smoothing that out, and tried this again. This was not working for the life of me. And if you know me, I usually do chocolate letters when I write anything on the cake. So I was like, okay, we're gonna set that aside, and I'm going to put the edible images on the cake. As you can see, the lip it's taller than the cake. We're gonna trim this down. I will tell you, this cake is frozen. In order for these to stick, I would recommend that the cake be room temp, like the same temperature as the fridge, because the cake was so frozen the images would not stick. So I trimmed that side down, went in with my other side, and I tried to line the checkers up as much as possible, but I was going to cover the seams anyways. In order to get these to stick, I went in with some white buttercream as like a glue. I will say, if you're going to use an edible image like this, even though I'm reusing the same cake, I would actually just have left the sides of the cake white, because as the cake sits in the freezer, it becomes, you can see the red popping through on the white parts of the edible image. So back to our logo, I decided just to cut out those images I made and trace them with a long toothpick, and then I was just going to fill it in with buttercream myself. Now the issue with this cake is because it was so frozen, everything would freeze instantly, but I just traced this as best as I could. It wasn't perfect, and I wish I had made like a little bit of black icing. I think that would have made the details stand out more, but this is not bad for my first time actually writing on a cake. Something to note about me is I have horrible handwriting and I'm dyslexic, so writing on a cake is not my strong suit. Writing in general by hand half of the time is legible, so this came out pretty well. I'm just smoothing out with that palette knife again and then shaping up the edges. That immediately set, and I got to piping the edge, piping our borders. We're going to keep the piping minimum here. So I'm using a 6B shell tip on the bottom, and then I call this the top lip of the cake. I'm using a 21 Wilton tip, and I'm going to go up the seam and then all the way around the top lip just to hide where these two pieces meet, and it hide it really well. You didn't even know these are two separate edible images. Then on the top, I'm going to go back in with the large shell tip, and the opposite way is how I am piping the smaller shell tip. Doing an inside border here with the shell tip, and then I decided, you know what, this is where I should put glitter on this cake. So I did some silver glitter, then remembered that I need to do the bottom border here, and that was literally it with the piping here. here. It's very simple, it's very cute, and I should have stopped there. Stay with me, I should have stopped there, okay? Because this is the exact cake I had envisioned. But looking at it, I was like, it needs something. You know, Formula One is so glamorous, it's so high tech and stuff. Why don't I add some large white pearl sprinkles between each of the gaps where each of the shells meet on the bottom? So first I did that on every opposite shell, alternating between them, and then I was like, no, let's do this between every shell. And again, I should have stopped once I added that glitter, right? That should have been my last step. I didn't though. So I am putting these on top of the cake also. And then I was like, you know what? Let's make this girly because women are underrepresented in motorsports. Let's make this girly. You know, this is my cake. So after I did all those sprinkles and almost lost one that they kept flinging at the wall on accident between my food tweezers, I decided let's take the bows that I had saved from my Hamilton cake and put them on the F1 cake. Now, the problem with these bows is they were too short, right? But when I usually put bows on a cake, it's between where the vintage piping meets as to bring that together. I was just putting these like on the top of the cake. So here's the cake with just the pearls. I left the short bows on, then decided to go back the next day and make really long bows with long tails. And I preferred these. I put 4 on the cake instead of 6. And I think it actually brought something to the cake. So tell me what your opinion is on this. Should we have done the bows and the sprinkles, or should we have just left it alone after the glitter? But overall, I think this cake is really freaking cute and is a great way to repurpose the cake. And I will say I did cut into this cake. You can find that on Shorts, and it was really easy to cut with an edible image. I was worried about that. Did I eat it? No, because this cake has been in my freezer for at least 2 months now, and now she has retired to the trash. Here is our completed cake. Obviously, it's been sitting in the freezer for a couple days and the image is sticking. But I think she came out pretty cute. I did girlify it. There were times I probably should have stopped decorating, but here she is. So I am making a cake for every single F1 team this year, including F1 Academy. So don't forget to like, comment, subscribe to see those. All my socials are linked down below if you want to follow me. And as always, the doggo picture today is going to be this picture of Clover because he is what I call my baking assistant. He always sits at the island watching me do things. That's it. Love you, minute kisses. Doing things stupid. I'll see you all next time. Bye.